Hi guys, and welcome to our first lesson and demo involving SketchUp. So as a forewarning, I am going to be showing everything in the Windows desktop version, but there is a way to access it through a Chrome extension, so you can do it through your web browser. You can do it on a Mac too, and SketchUp is one of those softwares where it's almost identical on a Mac to what it is on Windows, which is really nice. And then you could also access it through Udesk. And so I'll kind of just show you to start off with the different ways we can access it. But because I just have a Windows computer, I can't show you what the Mac version looks like because I don't have a Mac anymore. You can go download it directly from their website. This SketchUp Free is the exact same thing as SketchUp Web and SketchUp for Schools. You guys aren't going to be able to access SketchUp for Schools because ASU doesn't have a subscription for it, but SketchUp Web and SketchUp for Schools are the exact same thing, essentially. It's just my understanding that this SketchUp Web is going to go away after a while, but I could be wrong about that. But they started giving everyone access to it once lockdown started, to just kind of help people stay productive if they didn't have access to their regular computers that had SketchUp on it because those were at work. They could then access a kind of simplified-ish version of SketchUp through Chrome. Now, when you go on their website and you go to try to download it, I tend to find it tends to get all like freeze up on me at this area. When I go to like higher education and I say that I want a 30-day trial, and this could be just because I've already used up my 30-day trial quite many years ago. So when I log in, I tend just to get this like blank thing that doesn't actually let me download a 30-day trial. But honestly, this isn't how I recommend students download SketchUp anyway. I actually recommend you search for SketchUp older versions and you go to this page, because this is then where we can download SketchUp just kind of without having to go through their little rings and hoops, and also where you could potentially download something called SketchUp Make, which is a free version of SketchUp that they stopped releasing in 2017. And so if you download SketchUp Make, you actually can have it permanently as a desktop version for free without having to do like a trial, or after your 30 days is up, you have to buy the thing. After your 30-day trial is up, it just switches to the free version, which has a few less features, but none of them are features really that we're going to need for this class. The other options you have is SketchUp Web. So I'll click on Start Modeling, and I just want to confirm that SketchUp Web is pretty much the same as the SketchUp School version that I've used before. And yep, it is. So it just has kind of a condensed toolbar over on the side here and another little condensed toolbar over here, but it works fairly similarly to that SketchUp for School version, if maybe you guys ever used that in school. And then another option you have for accessing SketchUp is to go to Udesk. So if you go to udesk.appstate.edu or click on the link on As You Learn, you can log into what we call Udesk, or the GP Udesk. And how it works is you log in with your AppState email and password. And then, of course, Duo security pops up, but thankfully I'm very happy that they changed that thing to allow you to just save it for 2 weeks, because Duo is incredibly annoying in my opinion. and we can log in remotely onto a computer lab. And so you're going to want to log into this ADSP or STBE GPU one. So this one, not all students have access to. You guys have access to it because you're in this course and I requested you have access to it. Sure, let's let it access those things. And what this is going to do is, in my web browser, oops, maybe that's not my password anymore. Hold on. Yeah, that wasn't my password. That's why. So it's logging me into a computer lab on the ASU campus right now, but while I'm still just on my computer, not on the ASU campus. So for those of you who have Macs, when we get to the Revit portion, this is going to be one of your few options to kind of work with to be able to access the software. And so now I'm logged in onto a desktop there. I can go onto all of these different softwares. I can go right into SketchUp so I don't have to go through any installation process. I can just access the software right here. I'm going to click on exit though because I don't want to access it through here. One kind of word of warning about Udesk is that if you walk away from your computer for like 10 minutes or maybe a little less, I don't know the exact number, it will sign you out and it won't save your work. So that's kind of a word of warning. And the other thing too is that if I save anything onto my desktop or my documents, or I put anything in like the downloads folder here, it is not saved. The next time I go to log in, all of that work will be missing. And so here's your warning that if you do not save onto a flash drive or save it on my desktop and then in Udesk go into Chrome and mail yourself that file, you are going to lose it. So as a forewarning, a lot of students last semester, they said that the Udesk was good, but that they just lost their work a lot and that was not fun. There's nothing I can do to help you get it back. So please make sure you're saving on a flash drive or you are saving it and then emailing it to yourself through Udesk itself. Some students who had Windows computers too, they also used Udesk just because maybe their computer didn't have a lot of graphics power or a lot of RAM, and so they found it easier to just kind of access the softwares through this than installing them themselves. So those are some of the options that you can have, is you can just download and install SketchUp on your own computer. You can use this web version, but this web version also does not save automatically, so as you work through it, you'll have to click on save on occasion and it'll save it to your drive. Or you can use Udesk. So those are your options. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave this up because my hope is that I'll have some time towards the end of class or towards the end of this recording that I can show you how some things work in this version in comparison. So I'll leave this version up and I'm just going to install it. Yes, I do want to allow it to make changes. And so I'm going to be using the 2017 version purely just because there isn't really that many differences and this version will stay free for me forever. So I like that. And so it'll just run me through the setup wizard where I'm just going to click, 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 not read anything because who does that, and install. And it'll be kind of the same process for Macs and Windows, and I'll just pause the recording until this installation finishes. Okay. And so now SketchUp has been installed and I can open it. I do have to agree to the license agreement the first time I open it. If you want to go through and read through this, by all means, have a ball. I'm certainly not going to. And then it'll open up with the kind of welcome screen where it is once again trying to encourage me to buy the Pro version, which I'm not going to. Then the first thing we're going to do is go into the template options, and we'll select a template that we want to work in. So I'm going to use the architectural design feet and inches template and click on I agree, and then it'll launch into a blank workspace for me where I have my drawing area. I've got my toolbars up at the top, and then this default tray here, which you can get rid of. I like to keep it open for all of these different little tabs that are available in here, but you can get rid of it if you so choose. Now, SketchUp is a 3D modeling environment. So within SketchUp, we aren't necessarily keeping things two-dimensional like we were doing with hand drawings, and we're not going to keep things two-dimensional like when we get into AutoCAD. So AutoCAD is kind of just an extension of hand drawing to keep things nice and clean and even. With SketchUp, we're making it as a three-dimensional model. So we have our three axes that we can move around in. So we have our X, our Z, and our Y axes. So if you're ever thinking, of like, you might have noticed, well, actually I don't have it in my tray anymore at the bottom, but I'm a big Minecraft fan, so those are your Minecraft coordinates there. And if we hold down the scroll wheel on our mouse, we can orbit around three-dimensionally as well. If you don't have a mouse, I suggest you go buy one. It'll make a lot of this course much, much easier, and just general CAD work that you do will be much easier if you get a computer mouse. But if you don't have one, the orbit button is located right up here, or it's keyboard shortcut O on your keyboard. So you can hit O, and then you can click to move around. And then to get out of it, you just hit the space bar on your keyboard. Now, one of the first things that I typically will do in SketchUp is change my toolbars around. And so if I go into the View tab and go into Toolbars, what I like to do is, instead of using this Getting Started menu, I like the large tool set on the side. And then I get rid of that Getting Started one. And then I also like to add in the Views toolbar. You can move this over a little bit, but I just prefer the large tool set because it just gives me more access to the buttons. I don't use keyboard shortcuts a lot in SketchUp, purely because my small brain can only handle keyboard shortcuts for one software. So I'm very good with keyboard shortcuts in AutoCAD. I haven't memorized a lot of them for SketchUp or Revit, so I prefer just to use the buttons in this toolbar here. And then I'll close out of this, and now I kind of have extra tools that I can work with and use. Now, the next thing I tend to do is take whatever little figure that they give me and get rid of it. So the figure is helpful to give you a nice sense of scale, but oftentimes I find it gets in the way. So I just click on him and then hit the delete key on your keyboard, or you can use the erase tool, or you can right click and erase it. And if you wanted to add figures into your drawing after the fact, you of course can go add them in. But I just tend to find it kind of gets in the way when I'm first starting out. So within SketchUp, we have our toolbar kind of split into different areas. We have our drawing tools, then what I call our modify tools and our 3D tools, our measurement and annotation tools, and then our viewing tools. And then these are kind of for like our different cameras, setting up maybe finished renderings, things like that. Anytime I click on a tool here, what can be, don't know what that is, but anytime I click on a tool here, this instructor tab will tell me exactly what that tool is, and it'll tell me how to use it. So it's saying that this is the protractor tool, it measures angles. It's saying this is the rotate tool, it will rotate or stretch or distort things, and it explains how to use it, it explains some of the shortcuts. And so as a beginner starting out, I recommend you keep this instructor tab open because it can be a very, very helpful tool. What I'm going to do right now is to pan myself around, which I can either click on this little hand tool and then just kind of click and drag my drawing over a little bit and hit the space bar to exit it, or the shortcut for that would be to hold Shift and hold the scroll wheel down. So holding just the scroll wheel allows you to orbit three-dimensionally. Holding Shift and the scroll wheel lets you pan yourself around. And I'm just going to start off with drawing some lines, and then I'll show the rectangle tool as well and how that can work and be beneficial. So the line tool is located right here, and it's keyboard shortcut L on your keyboard. And you can just click to start your line, and anytime it's showing up as like green or blue or red, that means that it is on that axis. So that means it's running parallel to that axis. So about 90% of the time, we want to make sure that we're drawing our lines parallel to an axis. The other thing that you should notice is that as you're making that line longer or shorter, the number down here is changing. So as I make it longer, it's getting to be a bigger number or a shorter number. We can type in a direct amount that we want. So if we want 12 feet, we'll do 12 and then the little apostrophe mark right next to the enter key and hit enter. And then we can move our mouse in the direction we want to go for the next one. And I can type in 24 feet, enter, 12 feet, and I can even like click to close. So one thing that hopefully you're noticing is that these lines, even though this was perfectly on the green axis and this was perfectly on the green axis, these lines certainly don't look like they are parallel to each other. Parallel means that they would run and never meet. But according to the software, they were. And that's because by default, SketchUp is set into a perspective mode to help things look a little bit more visually realistic. But we can change that in the camera tab. We can turn off that perspective and we can say we want it to be parallel. Oops. So we can switch between parallel and perspective. And so now those lines do look parallel to each other. Let me just pan myself over a little bit. Now I could draw a similar shape using this rectangle tool, and I'll get a little kind of highlight. It's a little hard to see with the pointer thing on, but right now it's blue, which means it's flat against that face. Or I can have it, it seems like it doesn't want to let me make it flat against any of the other faces, which is not great. It could be just because I have this drawn in here, so we'll try it again with something else. And I can click to start it, drag it in the direction I want to go, and then I can type in the amounts I want. So if, let's say, I wanted to make this 16 inches by 16 inches, I would do 16 and then a quotation mark, comma, 16 quotation mark. You don't want to put 2 apostrophes because that is not the symbol for inches. The quotation mark, the 2 dashes, is the symbol for inches. And I'll hit enter, and I've made a box that's 16 by 16. And anytime you want to end a command in SketchUp, you hit the space bar to get out of it. Now, if I wanted to get rid of any of this, my best bet is to just kind of click and drag a window around all of it, and then I can click on eraser. I could right-click erase, or I could hit the delete key on my keyboard. All of those are different ways that I can erase things. So again, if I wanted to make a rectangle, which for some reason it's only allowing me to make flat ones, which is a little bugging me, but I'm okay with it. And then I can type in the amounts that I want. And so what I always do to try to figure out which number in this dimension thing is the one of whatever one is I make like a really long skinny rectangle. And so now I know that that first number is on that red axis on the X one, and the second number is on the Z axis. And so I'll just type in 24 feet, comma, 12 feet. Because I'm using that architectural template, it's automatically thinking in feet and inches. But if I just type in 24, comma, 12, it's going to make a 24 inch by 12 inch rectangle, which is not what I want. Now, if I wanted to make this 3-dimensional, I would use what's called the push-pull tool, which I believe is also keyboard shortcut P. Yes, it's keyboard shortcut P. And so we can see here in this little preview that push-pull takes our 3D model. If we click on it, we can bring it up, and we can either type in a specific amount, or we can just click of how high we want it to be. One nice thing with the push-pull tool too is then we can further alter objects and faces. So if we want to change things after the fact, we can pull them around. And if I wanted to take a second object, so if I click on this one and just want to make it whatever the height this one is, I can even just click on this face and it'll just bring it so that these two are at an equal height. Now, with 3D models in SketchUp, the thing that tends to make projects turn from really nice to really, really garbage pretty fast is that students don't group or make components out of things. And so right now, these are all just kind of 2D faces on a 3-dimensional object. And so if I go to move it, well, now like it's collapsing in on itself, it's doing these weird things, and it's not going to be a nice, pretty end result. And then you're going to be about an hour in, and just nothing is working correctly, and you don't know what the hell is going on. And so that's why before I even kind of start going over our project with you, I want to go over grouping and components, because it's so, so important for making SketchUp a lot easier and friendlier to use. And by the way, I undid that just with Control-Z on my keyboard. Control-Z is undo, or Command-Z if you're on a Mac. That's the undo shortcut for pretty much every software imaginable. That's your undo thing. It'll be your big lifesaver in our computer, in the computer portion of this course. So if I make this 3-dimensional, and I just brought it up a random height, I didn't measure anything. What I want to do is show you the difference between components and groups and why they can be so important. So I'm going to hit space to leave the push-pull command, and I'm just going to draw by click and dragging a window around this object, and I'm going to right-click, and that's where I can make it a group or make it a component. And we'll look at the difference between the two of them and how they might come in handy. And so first I'll make it a component, and I'll leave it named as component 1. If you want to name your components as you go, that's totally fine. I'll click on create. And now it is a component. So now if I go to this move tool, it's just moving the whole thing as one big individual box. And if I make a copy of it using Control-C, Control-V, so Control-C is copy, Control-V is paste, and I can click it over here, and I can even then grab it by a specific point, and I can move it to like another point. So these are both considered, whoops, I'm still in the move tool. I wanted to leave it there. So I'm just going to copy it from one endpoint to another one. These are two separate 3D objects, and I can't change anything about them. If I go into push-pull, it won't let me push or pull this face anymore because this is now a component. If I want to edit a component, I am absolutely able to do so, but first what I've got to do is double-click on it, and now I'm in this component editor, and now I can click on a face and change it. The difference with a component versus a group is as I change this original, it changes all the other ones as well. So if I change this original, this copy of it changes too. And if I ever want to get out of editing a component, I can just go into the pointer tool and just double click outside of this dotted box, or I'll double click back on it to get in there. I can right click just kind of out in the abyss and just say close component. So anything I do on a component, if I change it, all of its copies would change as well, which could be really helpful if it was something like a specific window that I had put in my drawing and I just wanted all of those windows to get changed. They can all change with it rather than just each one individually having to go through and change each one. Now, I'm just going to erase these two. And I'll make another rectangle here that I'm just going to do at a random size again. I'll push-pull it up. I'll go back into the select tool. I'll highlight it, right click, and this time I'm going to make it a group. So if I have it as a group, I don't have to name it, but also if I copy it, so if I Control-C to copy and Control-V to paste, I can still kind of move it around. I can change different things about it as I go. But the difference between groups and components is if I double click on this to edit it, the copies don't change. So it still is a singular three-dimensional object, but it acts separately from any copies that are made from it. And so I always recommend students group things as they go to just kind of make their work a little bit easier, because I can still edit things, but chances of me somehow getting rid of three-dimensional objects and just making random 2D faces that kind of collapse in on each other, or maybe accidentally deleting edges that I don't even realize I deleted, chances of that happening are a lot less if we are using components in groups as we work. Okay, so for this SketchUp project that we're going to work on is we are going to create a three-dimensional model of that small building house. And so I'm just going to right click, close group, go back into my select tool by just hitting space, highlight all of this, and highlight all of this and erase it, and then just kind of look at our instructions based on this object and see how we can kind of create it. So with SketchUp, I don't go into nitty-gritty details like I would in AutoCAD and in Revit. So in AutoCAD and in Revit, all of these little itty-bitty parts that make up like our wall, those are going to be super duper important. That's a little too zoomed in. So in AutoCAD, like I am going to have a section that just shows 1x6 vertical siding, lines that symbolize 1/2-inch plywood sheathing, lines that symbolize the wall stud, lines that symbolize the gypsum wallboard. All of that is going to be recognizable in AutoCAD and in Revit. SketchUp to me is much more for kind of ideation, of thinking about just the general layout of the building, thinking about aesthetics for it. I think it's a really great tool for interior design, but I don't foresee it as something for finalized architectural drawings. I do know that there are some people who use it that way, which is fine and great and dandy, but that's not typically how I approach it, at least. But we're still going to try to kind of mimic as best as we can some of the different parts of this building. And so just what I mean by that is, like with our exterior walls, we're going to give them a thickness, but it's just going to be a generic overall thickness of 7 1/4. We're not going to sit there and label out each individual part of the wall. So with that, I have my blank SketchUp. I'm just going to orbit around. And another thing too that's handy of why I like to keep this open is because this can just snap me to like some of the direct orthographics, so I could look at directly the front, directly the top. I could have an isometric view, pretty nice and easy. And then I'll hold Shift in my scroll wheel to just pan myself over a little bit. Because I usually like using SketchUp in kind of this isometric mode rather than looking at it from the orthographic views. And I'm just going to start with a rectangle, and I'm just going to pick a place to start it, and then I'm going to draw it out 24 feet, comma, 12 feet, enter. It turns out I was a little zoomed out, so I'll just use my scroll wheel to zoom in. The other thing too is you can use these here to zoom just to the extent of whatever you have drawn, or if I scroll out to zoom out, you could use zoom window as well to just kind of click and drag a window that you maybe want to zoom in on. But I tend to just use those mouse functions as my shortcuts. I try to at least incorporate these into some of the demos I do, but if I was just to be doing something in SketchUp on my own, I'd be using my mouse, which is why I highly recommend you go and get a computer mouse if you don't have one. Now, to show the thickness of my walls, I'm going to use what's called the offset tool, which is located right here, or keyboard shortcut O. No, it's not O, because O is orbit. Is it F? It's F. That's what it is. See, I told you I'm not very good with the keyboard shortcuts. And what offset does is it creates a parallel copy, whatever you specify your distance to be. So if I go into the offset tool and I click on this face, it'll allow me to then start making a rectangle inside of there, however far away I want. And so we can see that distance all the way in that bottom right is getting bigger as I get further away from that original one. So I'm just going to type in 7.25, and then it'll make a copy 7 1/4 inches in. And I'll Control Z to explain too of that. If I wanted to type that in as fractions, I would do 7 space 1/4, enter, and I would get the same result. What you don't want to do, and I'll Control Z again, is type in, like 7-1/4, because SketchUp actually is going to read that as 7 inches minus 1/4 of an inch. So it actually would make this 6 3/4. And so if you put a minus, that little dash in there, it's going to read that as minus. I tend to work with decimals. I know that's like a big no-no in the field of architecture. But as I mentioned kind of in the beginning of this course, I did not come from the field of architecture. I came from a field of industrial design. And we use decimals because decimals make more sense than fractions, in my opinion. And so now I have my wall thickness, and I'm going to just extrude it up 8 feet. Because on this west wall, it's 8 feet tall. I know it's a little bit taller on this one, but we can change that up. And so, without doing anything else, since I already have my walls done, or started at least, before I add anything else to them, I'm just going to highlight the whole thing, right-click, and make it a group. And so that way, if I go to add anything else to here, I don't accidentally mess up the group that is my walls. Next, I'll add in my floor underneath here. And so I'm just going to orbit around to look at the bottom of it. And so remember, that's just holding down your scroll wheel, or you can click right here to orbit your model around. And I'm just going to make a rectangle underneath, and I don't even have to really measure it because I could just click from one point to another one. And then I'm going to use the push-pull tool to pull that down 8 inches. Right? Let me just open up here. And just double check my floor is 8 inches in total. Yep. And again, I'm just going to draw to highlight around the whole thing. Sometimes it's a little tricky to get everything highlighted. So like I might need to orbit myself around a little bit so that way I could get the whole floor. Right click, make it a group. So as I work through everything, I just make it a group as I go. It's just the easier way to work. And right now what I can see, and it looks like to me in OBS it's popping up, which is good, is that we have the face of my floor and the bottom of my like walls little part here, they're kind of glitching together. And so that's when I can like go and double click on my walls. I can click on that face there and I can delete it, double click outside of it. So you can kind of edit things as you go, but it's just always a good idea to keep things in groups as you are making it. And let me just kind of reorient myself. And now I can start adding in my interior wall. I'll start adding in like my doors, my windows, and then my roof, and then even some materials and stuff. So to put in my interior wall, what I'm going to do is double click on the group that I made for my walls. So that way I'm in edit mode, and I'm just going to orbit around till I get a kind of a good interior view. And then I'm going to use one of my favorite tools called the measuring tape or the guidelines to help me lay out where my wall would go. And I could do it based on this or based on the floor. So your measuring tape is right here, and I believe, yes, it's shortcut T. And what the tape measure tool allows us to do is we can click on edges and we can kind of draw out a guideline from those edges out. And so I'll show you again. I could click on this edge and I could say, okay, I want to go over 12 feet. Additionally, it'll snap to like midpoints of things, so it's showing me where the middle of this is. So I didn't even have to like type any amount in, it just showed me already where the middle was. And so that's where the middle of my wall would be sitting. And then I can go out 2.25 in this direction, click on my guideline here again, and go out 2.25 in the other direction, just to show what the overall thickness of my wall would be. Because my wall is sitting centered on there, and it's 4.5 inches thick total. Then I can draw in another rectangle that just goes on these guidelines I drew. And use the push-pull tool to pull it, which I wish it didn't fill that in. So let me click on these faces to delete them. To take this and pull it directly down to the floor. And so now I have that interior wall in there. So the same thing then for like the guidelines for where my door and my windows are going to go is I'm going to go into the tape measure tool, and I'm going to measure from this east wall. I'm going to measure in 4 feet, and then I'll measure over 1.6 foot. And you also don't necessarily have to type in the inches mark. It'll automatically read numbers that you don't give a specific designation to. It'll automatically read those as inches. I'll go in 1.6 foot, and then from the top of the floor I'm going to come up 6.8 foot. And so it's just kind of framing out where my door would go. And then I can go into the rectangle tool, draw a rectangle there, and then I can use the push-pull tool to take this and pull it all the way through. And so because I have this grouped, I can only pull it to that face, and it actually then makes just a cutout hole there. And so to start off for all of our windows and our openings, we are just going to leave them as open kind of cutouts and holes. And so then again for this window, I'm just going to go from this face out 4 feet, and then from that center line 1.6 foot, from this center line 1.6 foot. And I also can use intersections, so I could measure this to be 6.8 foot up from the bottom, or I could just say have it intersect where that guide goes, and then up from the bottom 2 feet, and that was where my window would go. And so I'll go into the rectangle tool, and see how my rectangle is red right now? So that means that I'm on this current vertical face. And now it's blue because I'm on this flat face. Now it's green because I'm on this face. So it's going to change based on what color or what face you're currently on. I made my rectangle, and then I'm just going to use the push-pull tool to just blast it through here. What some students may try to do is what I was starting with, is they try to just go through the whole thing. But that then creates this weird inverted tunnel throughout your whole building. And so you really don't want to do that. You just kind of want to bring it until it tells you that it's on the other face. And you can also, while you're currently in the tool, you can orbit around, go to the other side, and click on that face. and then it'll just create the 2D opening. If having all of these guidelines here is kind of overwhelming, you can highlight them individually by just clicking and dragging and then erasing them, or in the Edit tab, you can click on Delete Guides and then it gets rid of all of them. And so I'm just going to make some more guides for my window back here. So it's up 2 feet, up 6'8", over from the edge 4 feet, then over in this direction 1 foot, 1 foot 6, over in this direction 1 foot 6, and rectangle, and pull it through, which looks like I didn't go through, I went too far. So that's because I didn't wait till I was on the face, I just kept going, and then it just made this weird little inverted shape. So I can click back on this face and I can say, no, I want you to just cut out here. Otherwise, it's not going to read it as like an opening for a window. And later on, we can go put a piece of glass in it. And then I'll put some more guides. So for this one, I'm just going to use these intersections. Four feet, which I went 4 feet out. Whoops. Control Z. So from that edge, I'm going to go 4 feet in. Then from that center, 1 foot 6. 1 foot 6. And whoops. So see, here's another little uh-oh I didn't start directly in that corner. So I'll just go back into the tool and I'll say, no, I want to start on that corner, end on that corner. Push pull. I can also type in the specific amount I want to push pull. So if I typed in 7 1/4, that could work. But if I'm getting that little heads up that says that I'm on a face, it'll open it up as that hole. And then my window's here. So I'm just bringing guides up to intersect where these guides are. 6 feet. And then I'm going to go 3 inches in each direction for this bank of windows. And then 3 feet over, 3 feet over. Rectangle, rectangle, push pull, push pull. And it's always a good idea too to kind of orbit around afterwards just to make sure that it didn't leave it as an opening. And then for my opening in here, so for this one, I'm going to do it from this top part. I'll go over 4 feet. Can I bring that straight down, I wonder? Ooh, I know what I can do. So I came in, I clicked from this edge, and then I said where they intersect. And so you always want to pay attention kind of what color that arrow is, just to make sure that you're on kind of the right face, up 6'8", rectangle, and bring it on through. And now I'm just going to go into Edit and delete all of those guides, because I do know that those guides are a lot. And I have all of the openings for my building. Okay, I paused just to make sure what I was thinking about doing next, because it's an approach that I typically don't use. So I was like, I wonder if this will work, and it will. So next then is to add in kind of that slope for the roof, and there are a couple of different ways we could draw that in. And so one way is that we can draw a line from this top corner directly up. And so I know I'm going directly up because I'm on that blue axis, or that y-axis, and I'm going to go up 6 feet, click it down to there, and then I can use push-pull to just pull it so that it meets that face. And I can do the same thing on this side of drawing from the outside corner directly up 6 feet, click to finish it off, push-pull, and then to that face, push-pull this up to meet it, and then actually we get that little awkward bit, but we can even click on that little awkward bit and we could shave it off so he don't exist anymore. With doing it this way, one thing we have to be careful of is when we go and delete these extra edges, that we're just double checking that nothing kind of wonky happens to our model as we delete them. So I'll click on, this edge, and I'll click delete, or I can go into the erase tool and I can click on these edges, and just as I'm doing it, I'm just kind of orbiting around just to make sure. Okay, sorry again. I'm going to keep pausing because I have a cold, and I'm sure you guys don't want to hear me coughing and sneezing in the recording. But as I'm deleting these edges, I'm just making sure that as I orbit around, it doesn't like mess anything in my drawing up, because that tends to be what can often just really make silly little errors in students' work. The other way that I can make this roof, so if I just undo a lot, the other way I can make my roof is to create a rectangle on this side that is just the thickness of this wall. And so if I hover over that point without clicking on it, it'll show me where it'll extend to meet there. And then I can just delete this little 2D ceiling it made there and use the push-pull tool to bring that edge up 6 feet. And then draw a line that connects from this endpoint to this endpoint and bring it out. One thing is too, when you're drawing from endpoint to endpoint, you want to just kind of always double check that you are drawing from the right ones. So for example, I could accidentally start on this face to this one, and now I'm getting kind of like a weird wonky shape. Or I could go from this face to this one, and then I'm like, well, why didn't it fill in? And then what I tend to find is students just keep clicking, clicking, clicking until it looks like it's right. And then further down the line, they realize that there's something within the model that's just compromised and weird and wonky. Which, we'll just do it from that. Well, see, this is the one that I tested to make sure it would work properly, and now it's just being interesting. Well, the other way also worked just fine, so you could do it kind of either way. there's other ways you could do it too. Using like the move tool, you can try to just pick this whole wall directly up. But I tend to just try to find what I, B, and C. Look, deleting that edge then creates this weird 2D frame, so Control Z, don't do that. I tend to find it's easiest to just try to work in kind of the smallest ways possible. And now that I have my walls framed out with my windows and doors, I'm just going to right click, close the group, and now I can focus on my roof. So for my roof, I'm going to again use my tape measure tool to just draw or extend a line out 9 1/4, and then I can just draw in a shape, and if I hover over that endpoint, I can, without clicking on it, I can just extend upward from there. And fill it in. And I know I have this little bit of overlap here on my model, but that's going to be okay for my purpose. And then I can bring it through to this other side. And that's one of the benefits, like I said, of working with your groups, is that if I didn't have these grouped, this roof would have really messed a lot up. And so we can actually maybe see that if I undo and I go back into my model. So now I'm back into this group. If I do a offset of this, or rather a tape measure, 9 1/4 up, and then I go to draw in my little shape, which, why isn't it keeping me on that on here? There we go. And then I go to pull it through. Well, now it's going to prove me wrong and it's not going to mess anything up, but it could have done something really iffy and really bad. And so I'm not going to leave it though, just because I don't trust. I like to keep everything grouped individual. I don't trust it. Whenever I give an example of why you shouldn't do something, usually then it always works perfectly. I'm sorry if I keep orbiting wrong, but my issue is that the orbit tools in all of the Autodesk products work opposite of the way they do in SketchUp. And so because I heavily use all of the Autodesk software, I just am so familiar with it, and I always think that just holding down the scroll wheel will pan me, and then when I get in SketchUp it doesn't pan. And problem that you're probably not facing, but I face a lot, is that it's just the opposite in like Revit and AutoCAD and Fusion, and so I get a little mixed up. All right, so now I have 3 different groups here. I've got my floor, my walls, my roof, and I can start editing them to have some materials, and then even go in and start adding in like my windows and such. So to do that, to add in like our materials, we are going to use the paint bucket tool, which I don't know what the keyboard shortcut for the paint bucket tool is, but when we open up the paint bucket tool, it gives us kind of a new menu over here in this default tray, in which we can select from various materials that are preloaded in. We have some different hatch patterns that we maybe can put in our drawings. We've got different types of roofing that we can put in our drawings. We have just generic colors that we could apply places, different types of metal, all the wonderful stuff. One thing you'll notice is with things being groups and components, which, oh, it's not doing that to the roof because I didn't make the roof a group. Whoops. So let me highlight around that roof, right click, make it a group. But if I click on the paint bucket tool and go into the roof, it highlights the whole thing. It applies material to the whole thing. If I go to put this rusted metal on the house, it applies it to everything in there. And that's purely just because it is a group or a component. It'll just apply it to the entire thing, which sometimes it's very helpful. So for instance, in the relation of this roof, that's great that I can just hit one button and it just applies all the way around. But for these walls and for the floors, it's not really going to be all that beneficial to have just that one pattern applied everywhere, because we don't really want it to just apply everywhere. And so that's where we instead can once again double click inside of the group to edit it. And now, as I apply my material, let me go into the cladding and siding one. Let's see, what siding do I want? Let's do modern siding, sure. It'll just do it to just the face that I click on. So it's only applying that finish where I select it to go. So it's only doing it based on faces. So that way, if I wanted to do a different finish on the interior, so if I wanted to, you know, paint my walls a nice beautiful urine yellow, I can go and do that. This also might be where some students are like, well, I can't really, you know, get into different areas, and that's where I have a nice trick for you, and that is the section plane. So with the section plane right down here, you can click on faces, and then you can use the move tool to move the plane in, and you essentially can cut your building open to see kind of more of the interior. So you can apply those different colors to wherever you so choose. And see too, this is where I'm like, oh, well actually this wall doesn't reach as high as I want it to. And so I can then come in with the push-pull tool in this section, and I can just bring that wall up to meet that roof. I could, even though technically this wouldn't be necessarily how it gets constructed, I could try to bring this one up to meet it. I'm just going to leave it there. And, you know, I can put a nice doo-doo brown in the windows to act as my like trim to match my nice pea colored walls. Also just because I'm pretty immature, so I find that funny. And I can apply my different materials and colors around my house. You can choose whatever colors you want. It is going to be your design, and part of this project also is going to be for you to kind of go in with the warehouse tools that I'll show you at the end to kind of go and decorate and lay out the building itself. So you can add in whatever colors you want. You do not have to choose the colors that I chose, or the materials necessarily even that I chose. What I'm more looking for with your project is, can you apply materials in SketchUp? Not, were you able to pick the exact same color that I picked out, but can you just put materials down? Because that to me is more important than necessarily you were able to read and find the exact color I picked out. And if at any point this section plane gets in your way, you can just right click and erase it, and then it goes bye-bye. And then I'll right click, close group, pan myself over a little bit, and then for the floor, I'm gonna double click on it to open it up as a group, and then I'm gonna right click and go into my cladding and siding, and I'll put the modern wood around the edges. And then for my flooring, I always thought there was a flooring, there's a tile one. I don't want tile though. Maybe I do want tile. I'll put some nice dark wood in there. Boom, beautiful, gorgeous. What a beautiful house. And so then I have kind of everything modeled. Maybe if I wanted to change, you know, like my roof in here too, I could double click on the roof and I could change my ceiling color to where's like more of a just a kind of white. And then right click, close group, and I've got my building starting to be better defined. So now if I wanted to add in windows and doors, I have two options. One option would be to draw them in as their own individual groups and components. And so what I could do is go into the rectangle tool and along either the sides of them, which let me orbit up a little bit. I can draw in my own rectangle from one face to another one. And the good part about it, this being its own group, is that anything I do with this has really no relation to this, so I can't mess anything up. Go into the select tool, highlight that whole window part, right click, make it a group. And another thing too is you can always know if you accidentally add other things into your groups that you don't mean to. Because if I, for instance, I just want it to undo so it's no longer a group. If I accidentally make my window and my floor a group. So right now my floor is selected and I didn't realize it, or I'm going to pretend I didn't. And I right click, make a group. The fact that this bounding box, this big blue bounding box for this window is going all the way around here should set off some alarm bells that, uh-oh, some things are in there that you didn't intend to. But I'll just Control Z to undo. Highlight that window, right click, make it a group. And then I can apply a material to it. And there are materials that are just kind of see-through glass. So if I apply that glass material to it, I can actually see through it. And since it's a group, I can also just Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I can just paste it in here. And I can just go around and paste it, Control V to paste. But oh no, it's not facing the right way, which it's let me pan around, which is where my handy dandy rotate tool can come in. So with my window highlighted, I'll just go into the rotate tool and make sure that it's blue or on that blue face So I could do it based off of down here or directly on the object. I just don't want it to be red or green. And then I can click to place it, click an axis I want to start it on, and then click the axis I want to rotate it to. So to show you that again, I first just want to highlight the window, and it's highlighted by default once you copy it. And then I'll go into the rotate tool, click on the object once you have that blue face, click on the axis you want to start it on, click on the axis you want to move it to. And so it wouldn't have mattered if I started on the red axis and moved to the green one. Like, that wouldn't have made that much of a difference. But the reason why I don't want like this red face is because if I start on this red face and I rotate it, it's going to rotate it based on that axis. So you just want to make sure which axis are you rotating it around to move it. And then I'll just go into the move tool. I'll grab it by itself, and you can also, if you want to really even have them perfectly centered, you can zoom in and you can grab it by its midpoint. And then I'm going to orbit around and I'm going to place it. Why won't it let me place on that midpoint? Curious. Interesting. Okay, so there it gave me that endpoint. There we go. I don't know why those snaps weren't popping up for a second. And I can paste again. And so usually when I copy and paste things, I usually just kind of put it off to somewhere for a second. And then I go and grab by a point that I like actually want to grab it by. Because usually when I copy and paste, it just kind of randomly selects a point to go off of. And then you can just kind of copy and paste it as you go. And uh-oh, it's doing the SketchUp thing. So this is a fun little glitch SketchUp does on occasion. I don't understand it. I don't know why it does it. But it'll just start kind of glitching out and doing some interesting things. What I've found can sometimes help is to file, save it, cross your fingers, close out of SketchUp, open it back up again. Why when I start can I never just open up like a thing that already exists? I've always just, why can't you just start and open a file? Open. Nope, we're still uh-oh. We're still in uh-oh land. Not great. Not great. There we go. Doing the zoom extents seemed to temporarily fix it. And I still got one window I need to put in there. But I'll do that within the warehouse just so I can show you guys how the warehouse tool can work. So the SketchUp warehouse is where people have put together different SketchUp components and they have them available for you to download into your drawings. For interior design, it's extremely beneficial because you can find specific pieces of furniture and you can load them into your models to help kind of show that furniture layout and kind of sell the different stylized idea that you have. So to get into the warehouse, you go to File, 3D Warehouse, Get Models, and this is sometimes where it also glitches on me, I think because I use the 2017 version. But these are all different designs that people have put together Someone made this thing of sushi, so they can just be built off of pictures. But people here have different, you know, end table legs to even then if you were designing something that wasn't necessarily a house, if you were just trying to make your own piece of furniture, you could do it based off of this. These were all put together by this company here. So in order to kind of just help sell their products, you can just go get their direct thing. So there are lots of companies out there that have SketchUp models available. I know Herman Miller is another big company that puts a lot of stuff out there for SketchUp. But first, let me sign in. And so hold on, I'm going to hit pause because I think I need to reset my password. Okay, yes, I did have to reset my password for my Trimble account. So you do have to make an account with them. It's completely free to do so. But that gives you access to everything in there in the 3D warehouse. And so if I search for Windows, sure, I can find different windows that other people have designed already. And I can then load those into my, my design. Now, sometimes they may not be the exact size, so I'll show you then how you can kind of work around with the scale for it. So let's see that I like these little awning windows, even though those are technically hopper windows. So I'm just going to click on this download, and it asks, do you want to just put this right into the model you're currently working on? And I'll say sure. And it now is allowing me to place this in here. And so I'm just going to place them over here for now. So that way I can rotate them based on my axis. So let me just pan over a little bit. So that way I can have them facing the way I want to. And then I'll try to move them into place, knowing full well that they are not the exact size I want, but that's okay. So what I can do next to kind of edit them to be the size that I want is if I double click on them, I can play around with the scale of the object. And so with the scale, I can move them on different axes, but right now it's just moving it based on that one face. So what I might actually want to do for this one, just because I was assuming that it was made out of several components in one component, because you can break components into more components, but it looks like they modeled everything just as one piece. So I actually got out of editing it as a component, and now I'm just changing the scale, and I can just move the whole thing to be up, the whole thing to be wider, which, whoops, now it wants to change the scale of my building. Not ideal. And let me orbit around, click on the object, change the scale. And depending on which one of these scale things you grab onto is how it kind of gets changed and moved. So what I want to do is do it based on this middle one and change it to get bigger. And now I have some windows in here in my model that are looking a little bit nicer than just these ones. These help give the idea of like, hey, this is a window, but this then can kind of help make it a little bit more realistic looking. So let's go back into the warehouse And let's get a model for a door. And so again, you can find them from specific companies that will load in models of their doors. You may even find some where they just have a bunch of them in here. So for example, there's lots of different doors right here. I'm just going to download. Do I want to put it into my model? Yes. And then it's loading in. So I just got to kind of give it a minute to load in all those different doors. And hope that it doesn't freeze. Okay, so I've got all of these different doors here. And so what I can do is I can place them over here, kind of off to the side, hit space to get back into just the general select tool. And that's where I can double click on this model and I can delete these doors that I don't necessarily want. So these are just kind of components within this component, and I can get rid of any doors that maybe I don't want. And now I'm left with just this one door, and I can then move this door into place. Well, actually first let me rotate it around because I want it to swing on that side. I'm just being picky at that point. And then I can grab the door, shift and scroll wheel to pan over, and then I can use the scale tool to shrink my door down. So again, when you're using the scale tool, you want to try to do it based on these middle parts because that does it kind of uniformly. So if I scale it based on the uniform amount, otherwise it may start to distort everything. And then just space to exit the command. And so you can start to add in different little details, different little components, different pieces of furniture inside your building as well. And so what you may find to be the best for adding in different pieces of furniture is to go in with the section plane and just do from the top and then just move that section plane so that way you're actually looking into the building instead of just middle of the floor. And that way you can kind of place the different pieces of furniture, find the different things that you want and that you may find that you need. As a forewarning with the warehouse is fantastic. However, on occasion, if your model is very bare bones, basic, doesn't really have a lot to it, and you start adding in really, really, really fancy, very, very intricate components, it'll start to make your model look a little blah in comparison. So for example, like with this door here that has every little detail of like the lock and the handle, if I have like some beautiful intricate kitchen pieces here with just like my generic walls and like this kind of generic window, if I just had these ones in here, it's going to start making my model look a little weird in comparison to all of the different components that are in there. And so some of companies, like how I mentioned earlier, Herman Miller, so there are lots of different components out there that they have put together as well as other people have put together for them. And some of them are, the detail they put into them is really good for a SketchUp model. They don't try to overdo things too much. And so, you know, I could put this chair in here and there's still enough kind of line work to the chair, and I can rotate the chair around too. So whoops, I'm not flat against a face, so see how it kind of clips into the ground and everything. So when I rotate, I want to make sure that I'm getting a flat face. There's enough detail to help make it look fairly realistic, but it's not necessarily taking away from the model itself. And so it's kind of trying to find that, that balance between the two of them. And that is kind of a very basic introduction to SketchUp. What I'll do is, for the other video, or actually I'll just do in the last couple of minutes for this video. So if you are using the web version for SketchUp, then the difference is, first off, you should save as you kind of work or as you go. And so it's always a good idea to save it to, and then you should be able to link it to your drive. I don't know why it's not allowing me to link to my drive, but kind of weird. But maybe that's just with the SketchUp for Schools version. Because like I said, the only familiarity I have with this, with the SketchUp web, is through SketchUp for Schools. Still, the first thing that I typically would do is to take that person and get rid of them. And so that's either right-click erase or the delete key on your keyboard. Your keyboard shortcuts are still going to be pretty much the same, where Shift and the scroll wheel pans you around. Just the scroll wheel orbits you around. And they give you some tips in the very bottom corner for how those work. And your measurements of what you type in can still be found in here. You don't necessarily click in there to type them in. They get fed through there automatically, but that's where you can find them. You can change your visuals. In one of these guys. So yeah, so right now we're in perspective, but we can change ourselves over to an isometric. And I can just start by drawing a rectangle that's 24 feet, 12 feet. Whoops, I did 12 inches. So I'll start with a rectangle. Why am I doing a center rectangle? I rarely do that. I like to do corner to corner. Why is it still doing it based on center point? You know what? We'll just keep that, I guess, and I'll just start over here. 24 feet, 12 feet. Enter. The offset tool is located underneath the push-pull tool. And so you can offset, which, whoops, it's being very sensitive with my clicks for some reason. So if I offset this face in 7.25, enter, and then I can just click on that little arrow to push-pull this up my 8 feet. Space to get out of the command. I can orbit around slightly to click on this face to get rid of it. And still, you'd want to click and drag and then right-click and make it a group or a component. I tend to work with just groups. I find groups easier. But components can be beneficial if it's something that you are having to copy a lot. And if you were to make any changes to it, you'd want all of those changes to be exactly the same. And then I can go through with the rectangle tool and put down my floor, go through with the rectangle tool, put down my roof. And so your tools are condensed in this toolbar, and unfortunately there's no way that I know of to be able to change it. But if it has a little arrow next to it, that means that there's additional options for it. So aside from just a rectangle, you can do a rotated rectangle, you can do a circle, you can add your text, you can do your push-pull, your follow me, which I'll go over next week, your offset. These are some 3D modeling features which only are available in the Pro version. So I don't know why they're showing up here in this free web version, but these are just kind of how we can do some unions or subtractions. Your move, your rotate, your scale, your tape measure, your section, and then your orbit, pan, and zoom are located all the way down here. If you want to access the warehouse in the web version, that's over here, I believe. Here. I could have sworn it was one of them in here. Or do they not allow the warehouse anymore? Because that would be just tragic. One moment. I was so close. So it's in the components tab here, and then you can search the warehouse for like door. And then it'll go find doors. A lot of times for some reason my computer thinks I speak Italian, and so like Italian things are the first things that pop up. I don't understand why. But so you can find different doors, you can load them in. Things work almost exactly the same as the regular, or I guess as the desktop version. It's just a web-based platform. But you still also just want to make sure that you're saving fairly often as you're working. And then to turn in your assignment here, you can just download it as a SketchUp file. And you can download it as any year file, because I do have the 2021 version on my home computer. Or if you wanted to backdate it to the 2017 version, you can. SketchUp is a software that it doesn't have backwards compatibility. And so what I mean by that is that if I make a file in the 2021 version, I can't open it in the 2020 version. However, if I made a file in the 2020 version, I could still open it in the 2021 version. And so I tend to try to use the oldest versions possible, so that way it's compatible with more versions. AutoCAD does have some backwards compatibility, but it's also, they haven't really changed their files since 2013. So if you're using a version from 2013 or later, you'll be fine with an AutoCAD. Revit does the same thing that SketchUp does. So with Revit, every single year that they change their software, and you have to download their software on a subscription too, so you have to be using the latest year. But every single year they update it, all of your files lose compatibility. So you have to constantly be upgrading your files, which takes forever, and it's kind of nonsensical, but that's how they operate nowadays. And so there is a very basic overview of SketchUp. Next week I'll go over some of kind of the more practical applications for it, so how we could maybe even make drawings for production using SketchUp, using the layout tools. Or not next week, next video. Did I say next video? I don't know. I have taken some cold medicine, so now my mind's starting to wander a bit. If you have any questions, particularly if you decided you're going to be using the web version, I know I didn't really go over the web version in a lot of detail. I did it for maybe 10 minutes, if that. So if you have any questions about just using that web version, feel free to email me. Feel free to come in on office hours if you have any questions about using the regular version, whether it be on the Mac or whether it be on the desktop version or in UDesk. Feel free to, again, stop in office hours, send me emails. If you email me a question, I'll usually just record a demo for you as a response. If you come to office hours or we set up a one-on-one meeting, you can actually share your screen with me so I can see what you're working on. You can even give me access to your mouse so I can kind of play around and see what's happening. If you encounter that one little weird glitch that started happening to me, from what I found, just hitting Zoom Extents seemed to fix it. It has happened to me before where that glitch continuously comes up, so I don't know an all-around surefire way to solve it. I know that other people have experienced it too, so but Zoom Extents seems to be a good way to solve it for at least the time being. And that's how I face all of my problems, is I just put a band-aid on it and pretend it doesn't exist anymore. And yeah, that's it for this week. I'll stop rambling now, and I'll talk to you guys in a few minutes.